No Box Dance presents Dance Behind the Screen, process production, and social media. Don't forget, say no to the box. Dile no a la caja. 고정관념 일의 상자에서 벗어나세요.
Welcome back to Dance Behind the Screen podcast. In today's show, we are talking with Renée Jaworski, the Executive Director and Co-Artistic Director of Pilobolus. Renée received her BFA from the University of the Arts in Philadelphia. Upon graduating, she began work with Momix, performing and teaching throughout the world, as well as creating her own work. She began performing with Pilobolus in 2000. Renée has served as choreographer and creator for exciting projects and collaborations, such as the 79th Annual Academy Awards, which you hear about in this episode, and Pilobolus' evening-length production, Shadowland, the focus of today's show. And for the Grammys, she has worked with a myriad outside artists throughout the International Collaborators Project. In 2010, her alma mater honored her with the university's Silver Star Alumni Award for her work as an artist in the field of dance. Renée lives in Connecticut with her husband and daughter. We hope you enjoy today's episode, which was recorded live as part of the No Box Dance Film Festival. In today's show, we talk about the process of creating Shadowland, what shifted to prepare for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia performances and other performances around the world, and, of course, how social media is influencing the dance world. Enjoy the show! My name is Marthea, and I'm one of your co-hosts and the managing director of No Box Dance.
Hello, everybody. My name is Reina, and I'm one of your co-hosts, and I am the manager of community engagement for No Box Dance.
Hello, everyone. My name is Azaria, and I'm also one of your co-hosts, and I am the manager of resources and archives for No Box Dance.
Welcome to our show, Renée.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So our theme this year for No Box Dance Film Festival 2022 is dancing around the world. So our first question, we're really curious about how does Pilobolus share and respond to different aesthetics and cultures around the world?
Pilobolus we've been around for 51 years now. And dance in general, I think, is it's a universal language. It's something that people can connect to, and as they're watching, really allow it to change their chemistry. And whether you're doing it or watching it, the physical experience, the chemical experience is the same. The kind of dopamine experience that you get from watching dance is the same as if you were doing it. And the way that we interact around the world and the way that it translates, I think that's what you're asking, right? Like, how does it kind of cross culture? It's really about the human experience. Every piece that we make has its own world. It is creating a world where there are beings, whether they be human or not, because, sometimes as Pilobolus, we don't make beings that are human. We put bodies together and create other beings. But it's really about the interaction between the beings on stage. And that is something that everybody can connect to. Whether you're watching animals or human beings or insects or plants, animals, fungi, the way that they interact with each other is really what our stories stem from. So in that sense, that's how I think it crosses cultures. It is a human experience or an earthly experience.
I love that. And I'm going to go a little bit off script because I heard you say fungi. And for those who don't know, do you want to tell them a little bit about the Pilobolus, what it means?
Sure. Pilobolus, for those of you who don't know. A lot of people know this, and I'm really shocked. But Pilobolus, the word, it's not just a dance company. It is a fungus. It is a little tiny mushroom. And it's like the size or smaller of your pinky nail. It grows on cow dung. and has to be eaten. Okay, so it grows on cow dung. It gets ripe, and when it's ripe and ready, it shoots its spores like 6 feet in the air. And for a tiny little mushroom that's like the size of your pinky nail, 6 feet in the air is like a mile or something like that. And it shoots it really far away from the cow dung so that a cow can come and eat it up again. It has to go through the cow's digestive system and then poop it out again in order for it to regenerate. So it is this weird little fungus, but it's super strong, super powerful. It bends and twists to reach toward the light. So when the founders were looking for a name for their company, they thought that Pilobolus not only was a cool word, but it was a really great metaphor for what they were doing in the world. They were looking for the opportunities and looking for the experiences and looking for the inspiration. So they were bending and twisting toward the light, literally and figuratively. And then like just shooting themselves out into the world. And eventually, as time went on, they didn't know that this was going to happen at the time, but they started to, shoot little spores out everywhere, and people started to pick it up and eat it and and reproduce it. So, yeah, it's a cool little fungus. You should look it up, and you will see online if you look it up, Pilobolus next to a rifle, and when Pilobolus shoots its spores, it can beat the bullet in a rifle.
We really are excited to talk to you today about Shadowland. So for our audience who don't know much about Shadowland, can you briefly describe what it is?
Sure. Shadowland is an evening-length production that Pilobolus made in 2009, I think is when we ended up finishing the creation of it. And it was the result of us working for years in this sort of Shadowland world, this shadow realm. Back in 2005, I think it was, or 2004, we were asked by a car company to create the silhouette of a car. And the flash forward like a year and a half later, and the director of the 2007 Academy Awards saw that commercial and called us up and said, "Hey, I saw you do this. Do you think that you'd be able to represent the year's nominated Best Film category for all of the films that are nominated for Best Film that year in shadow?" And not knowing if we could do it, because that's how we approach everything, we were like, yeah, sure, we can do that. And we started to create images that represented the year's nominations for the best film that year. So we started to get this catalog of shadow images. And after people started seeing that, they started hiring the company. Now, this is after like 40 some odd years of being a modern dance company, that we like struck on this like new sort of way to use our bodies and a new medium of storytelling. So people started hiring us to help them get their message out. It was a very clean and clear way for people to get their messaging out, whether it be a commercial or a gig where, a conference where somebody wants to playfully get their company's message out. We would go in and do this and create little pieces. After a year and a half of doing that, we had a ton of material. And we were like, we can make a show. So we created this evening-length performance. It toured the world. It was a hit. And I think it toured Europe for 9 years before we brought it to the States, or like 7 years before we brought it to the States. And then it had a whole other life in the States. We created this show, and it's the story, the baseline of the story is it's a coming-of-age story of a young woman who, as she's coming of age, she sort of dreams of being in a different place. She kind of like, she's at that age where she's like butting heads with her parents, and they're like getting all inner space and not giving her the time that she needs to just grow up. And they're trying to like treat her like a kid, as you always do as parents. You look at your children and you think like, they're always going to be babies in my eyes. But she really wanted to grow up. And then she goes to bed that night and she like drifts off to sleep and enters the shadow world, where she meets a giant hand that turns her into a kind of humanoid with a dog head. And then she has this wonderful adventure where she learns a ton about herself, grows in so many ways through experiences that are like poignant and absurd, comical. She meets characters that are scary. She meets characters that are very friendly and take her in and nurture her. And then in the end, figures out almost Wizard of Oz-ish, like how to come back to herself.
Renee, Shadowland is one of those pieces. I remember seeing it, and I think I told Matt Kent about this in our interview, I think episode 23 on Dance Behind the Screen podcast, that I remember seeing here in Dallas. And I was just like in shock and awe. Like, you see the videos on social media and on YouTube and things like that of the work that you do as Pilobolus. And I actually always tell my family, they're like, what's Pilobolus? I'm like, the car commercial one. And everyone's like, oh, yeah. Okay, that dance company. But anyways, I was saying, I remember seeing the work in 2019 and talking to Matt Kent about how just like the way you create work that then connects to the audience of the city that you're in. So I remember having like in Shadowland, it was like you had like almost like a cowboy hat kind of thing, like playing on, Texas spirit. So I was kind of wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you kind of generate those scenes in Shadowland. And I guess like, how do you pinpoint in specific locations what you want to focus on?
That's a great question. And I just want to point out, so Matt Kent, for those of you who don't know, Matt Kent is my partner and co-artistic director and also co-creator of Shadowland.
Hi, Matt, if you're listening.
Amongst other collaborators, but he and I were the lead creators. What you're describing is sort of my favorite part about touring Shadowland, because what we do is at the end of the show, once the story is over, we call it a finale, and we create usually like 4 or 5 minutes of a little greeting card of and about and to a love letter to the city that we're in. And the way we go about that usually is, one, we talk to the presenters, the people who are bringing us there. And we talk to the people who live in the city. And if we know anybody who lives in the city, and we collect information about what they feel makes that city, like what makes Dallas Dallas. In your mind, define Dallas in images. And then we collect all of these things and we pick which ones we think we're going to be, most successful at executing, what's going to be fun. And we always think to ask, are there any current events, like quirky current events that happened that you would only know if you lived here in Dallas or were here for a while? It's always a hit, and it's always so much fun, and it really allows us to connect to the people of the place that we're at, and it also allows us to really get to know the place much better. Sometimes you when you're on tour, you go to a city and you kind of, all you see is the hotel and the theater. But this forced our performers and us to get out and look around and speak to people and create something for them specifically.
And Renee, to tie it in kind of to how we're approaching the film festival and talking about dance and film, it almost sounds to me like it's almost like storyboarding, kind of like these greeting cards to then connect with your community. And I feel like this is exactly what makes Pilobolus so unique and so innovative, because there is that community development aspect of the company, but from a performing arts standpoint, where I feel like a lot of times when we talk about engaging community, it has to do with workshops or things like that, which of course Pilobolus does as well. but I just have to like acknowledge it's really cool how you all are approaching ways of creating community for the, passive audience member as well. I think it's really special.
Thank you.
So you recently brought Shadowland to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the third time. So we're really interested. Yeah, we're really excited to hear about this process. So can you talk a little bit about how the company prepares for these performances? We can even tag on with these finales. What adaptations, if any, might need to be made when you're presenting work in different countries with different cultures?
Yeah, as you can imagine, we had to make pretty major adaptations when we went to Saudi Arabia. The first thing we did when we were asked in 2000, I think the first year we went was 2017. The first thing we did when we were asked is ask ourselves, because it's a big deal to go to Saudi Arabia, to bring our dancers to Saudi Arabia, and then to really think through how much compromise you're willing to make with your art in order to allow other people to see it from a different culture.
Could you give some examples maybe about like the questions you all were having or the conversations you had?
When we were approached the first time, they asked if we could make Shadowland an all-male cast. And that was a hard no. We were just like, absolutely not. This is a coming-of-age story for a young woman. That story looks completely different than a coming-of-age story for a little boy. And we were not willing to, one, cut out half of our cast in order to do it, but also to really change the story so much to accommodate that thinking, that they couldn't see women on stage. So that was a hard no. Then they came back and said, okay, if you keep the women on the stage and the woman as a lead, then is there a way that you can choreograph it so that the men and the women don't touch each other? We really had to think that through because, yes, there is a way. And then we thought, how much does it change the story if certain parts are no longer in there? If she no longer, during the course of her self-discovery, meets and falls in love with the centaur, how would we replace that? We can't replace that. So how do we then change it so that it becomes, I'm going to call it PG, How do we do it in a way that is acceptable to their culture? We can tell this story without the nudity. We can tell this story without men and women actually touching each other. There can still be an emotional connection between the characters on stage without physical connection. And it was a fun thing to develop. And then we started asking ourselves, okay, how can we partner? How can men and women partner without touching each other? So we brought in props, we brought in poles, we brought in a sheet, we brought in other things that we could carry each other around on that didn't have physical contact, but still created the swooping and the lifting, but there was no skin on skin.
Renée, I wonder, was there any like non-negotiables for you and for Pilobolus when reimagining Shadowland? Because you talk about you could do it without nudity, you can do it without touching. To me, it's hard to imagine because I feel like so much of the work Pilobolus does is that intricate partner work. So yeah, were there any non-negotiables that you all were like, we're absolutely not doing this? You mentioned we're not taking women out. But were there other things that you weren't willing to let go of?
Once the idea of partnering through props came in, there were a lot of things that fell away and kind of like fell into place. So it was sort of a non-negotiable. We had to lift each other. We had to figure out a way to get people in the air because we're just not Pilobolus if we're not flying around, we're flying each other around. So I think if we didn't figure that piece out, we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Once all of these changes were made and all of these cultural adaptations were made and creative adaptations were made, how did the people of Saudi Arabia respond?
They roared and, like, to my surprise, like, cheered and clapped the whole way through. And the best part, my favorite part, is that at the end of the very first show, the dancers were greeted by some of the children, the young girls in the audience, and they came up and they said, "Thank you. I've never seen a woman perform on stage. Thank you. I've never seen a woman play a lead role before." So we suddenly went from, like, oh, we're doing this, like, weird thing to our work, to, oh my God, we just changed the paradigm of an entire, like, audience of girls.
What was it like? Did any of the dancers, any of the performers share any of their experiences with you and how it affected them?
Yeah, a lot of our performers, the same way that we did, but, because they're our performers, we're like, wait a second, what are we doing? Where are we going? Why are we doing this? Are you out of your mind? And it was a similar thing. Like, once they heard the reasoning behind it, once they heard what they could bring to a culture, like, not everybody shares the same views. Just like when we live here in America, not everybody shares the same views. So to think that you're going to a society and you're only performing to one type of person, that's a mistake. You have to think, like, okay, there are other people that don't think that way. And let's just think we're performing for them. Or when the government agency said, we'd like to stretch the boundaries of what people are deeming acceptable these days, and I gotta say, as soon as those girls came up, it changed their experience immediately. It changed the performer's experience. It made them go, okay, what we did worked. We had an idea of what we could do, and that little thank you from those beautiful little girls made it all worth it.
And Renee, I'm curious, what have the conversations been like? And when you travel with the company too, being a woman as a director, like, how has that been received?
We purposefully sent me on the first tour there. It was actually Matt's idea. He was like, you know what? So what was interesting about the first time we went, we were in Riyadh, which is a little bit more conservative of a city. And it was all men in charge over there, and they wouldn't speak directly to me. They spoke to me through my agent, who's a man, with the exception of one reporter who wanted me to do an interview. And, you have to wear your abaya, they call it an abaya, and you have to have your hair wrapped. So out of respect, while we're in the theater, we sort of made a deal that, like, while we were in the theater, we didn't need to be in our abayas or have our hair wrapped because it's our space. It's sort of like our living room. But the reporter came in, and I had my abaya on, but I had forgotten my hair wrap. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me go get my hair wrap and my scarf. And he said, no. I want to make a point. Will you leave your hair out? And this is at a time that, like, my hair was long and blonde. And so it was, he was clearly making a point. So, like I said, there's not one type of person over there. So then the next time we went back, the person who greeted us was a woman. Her abaya was fully open, her hair was out, and she had tattoos all over her hands, henna tattoos all over her hands that you could see, and all over her neck. Completely different feeling. Spoke directly to me, of course, because she's a woman. And then, like, it feels like each time we go back, it's a little different. But that was, like, the most drastic change. We're also in a different part of the country. So that was interesting. When the first year I was told that I was not allowed to go out on the street alone, I needed to be accompanied by a man. The second time I went, I was training for a marathon. And not that I would want to run in that heat outside, but I needed to use the gym. And they closed the gym down so that I could go and run.
Wow.
Yeah. So things like that. And, as, like I said, as time goes on, certain things are changing. But it's an interesting comparison to what we live in here. But I do have to say also, even here, we're coming, as people are getting more conservative, and it's really the questions that we get and the concerns that are being brought up to us about our shows are starting to sound very similar to the line of questioning that I was getting from the Saudi Arabians.
I'm curious too, if the Shadowland, do you think that you'll bring other pieces in the future? I know Shadowland might be a little bit more digestible because everyone is behind the screen and we see the shadows. So do you have hopes that maybe you'll take a different work where it might be a little bit more obvious who's in the forefront?
Funny that you should ask that. Because I don't know if you can tell, but I'm in a theater right now. And what we're doing right now is creating something to bring over to perform there. And it's going to be, it will be something, live dance, but there will be filmed shadows behind us. So it's still connected to like the idea of Shadowland and the brand, but we are creating something that will be performed. I mean, Shadowland has a lot of live dance in it already, but this is now a different piece. But we are creating it specifically for their culture.
Do you think social media is influencing the dance world? And if so, does it influence the work of Pilobolus?
I do believe that social media is influencing the dance world. And yes, it is influencing us. I mean, so what it's doing is it's creating another venue that is sort of a level playing field where people don't need a presenter or a ton of funds to get an idea out, right? What it's also doing, I think, is creating a very specific, it's on film. So it's really making people think about how movement looks on film. It's a two-dimensional thing. It's a three-dimensional art form smushed into this two-dimensional space. So how do you make that look good, and how do you make sure that the feelings are conveyed that you're wanting to be conveyed? So I think people are thinking about filming dance differently. I've seen such a huge jump in the way that people film dance over the last few years. And it's become its own art form in itself, and it's very specific to film.
So, Renee, how do you say no to the box?
Oh, I love that question. Every time we get into the studio, okay, when Pilobolus was started, people questioned whether it was dance. It didn't look like other stuff that was up on the dance stages. It didn't look like ballet. It didn't even look like the modern dance that was happening in the world. They were weirdos. And as time went on, the world sort of, started to take in what they had to offer. With every new piece that we've made, we go in as if it's the first piece we've ever made. We bring in a new person, a new collaborator. We explore a different subject matter. We use it sort of like a masterclass in whatever we want to learn about. And then we create something. It's sort of the way that we digest information as movers. It allows me personally, and I think a lot of the people that we work with in the dance world, it really is a lens in which I understand the world through. And I think whenever we put up a new work, we're always sort of trying to get back to that, like, how far can we push this? What's the new thing that we're going to do?
I love it. I think time I think of Pilobolus, I think of a company that's also always pushing boundaries and always creating something new, something to question. Is that dance? But I'm going to lead us into our next portion, Renee, which is my favorite portion of the show.
Flash 4.
Our Flash 4, where we ask all of our guests to answer 4 questions in a flash.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
If you had to recommend a research to our audience, what would it be? It can be a book, podcast, someone to follow.
My favorite book that I keep in my heart and my soul that I've ever read was something I read when I was like 24, and it's called Centering by MC Richards.
What was the first dance you saw?
The very first dance that I ever saw, aside from my friends in our recitals, my little like tap dance, was actually on Sesame Street, and it was Moses Pendleton.
Oh, yeah.
One of the founders. That was the very first time I saw modern dance.
I love that. Do you think social media has a positive influence on the dance world? Yes or no?
Yes.
What is your favorite social media platform?
They're all, oddly, I find them all very different. So, and they all have like unique little quirks to them. But I'd have to say probably Instagram because I'm a visual person.
Well, thank you so much, Renee. This has been such an interesting interview. I feel like we went some unexpected routes, which is perfect for Pilobolus. And how can our audience stay connected with you and with Pilobolus?
So if you want to sign up for our we will send you like an email blast or anything like that. You can go to our website, pilobolus.org. You can always email us any questions you want at info@pilobolus.org. And, or you can reach out to me, R. Jaworski at pilobolus.org.
If it gives you joy, it gives you joy. And you don't have to explain it. It gives you joy. And you don't have to explain it. It gives you joy. If it gives you joy. If it gives you joy. And you don't have to explain it. It gives you joy. If it gives you joy. If it gives you joy.
Dance Behind the Screen podcast is produced by Nobox Dance, an art service organization that creates, collaborates, and discusses art with artists and the public. Dance Behind the Screen podcast is co-hosted by Azaria Hogans, Raina Mondragon, Marthea Nygaard, and Yejin Choi, with sound design by Daniel Rosas.
Thanks for taking your time to tune in to Dance Behind the Screen, a bi-monthly interview series where we go behind the screen to question process, product, and social media. Be sure to follow us on social media at KNOW Box Dance. See you next time, and don't forget to say no to the box.